Welcome, everybody. Every single serious discussion about improving the future tends to turn into a discussion about improving education. That's something I've observed many times over the years. After all, the future features large disruptions in technology, in employment, in climate, in where and how people live, and in the kinds of ideas that spread quickly around the world. To cope with the challenges of these disruptions and to be able to take good advantage of all the opportunities arising, that's going to need new sets of skills, new knowledge, new thinking methods, and frankly, new strength of character. We, all of us, are going to need to learn lots more things more quickly than ever before, hence the need for changes in education. That's where technology can come in a positive way. Improvements in education that are enabled by new technologies have long been foretold. Nearly 20 years ago, I enjoyed reading a book by the famous Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen, along with two of his colleagues. The book was called Disrupting Class: How Disruptive Innovation Will Change the Way the World Learns. In that book, the writers commented that venerable educational institutes were notoriously resistant to change, but the writers thought that opportunities with technologies would in due course lead to major transformations, with students everywhere being able to learn more topics more quickly in ways more suited to each of their individual needs and learning styles. Well, up until recently, the changes predicted by Clayton Christensen and others who advocated something called EdTech have tended to happen more slowly than hoped for. That shouldn't really surprise us. Disruption often goes through an initial disappointing, slow phase before accelerating through faster change. And that faster change is what seems to be upon us now in February 2026. AI systems have upgraded in just a few years to being often incredibly useful for people wanting to learn new things. But at the same time, as perhaps with all disruptions, there are potential large downsides to the changes as well as potential large upsides. It's not just that AI systems can mislead people, even thoughtful people, with made-up hallucinations they offer. It's also that these systems can be used by bad actors to intentionally mislead people. And moreover, these AIs can leave us distracted, lazy, drained, or paranoid. So how can we, all of us, find the best ways of learning with machines to gain and share the benefits without falling victim to the potential downsides? To discuss this critically important question, I'm delighted to be joined today by three speakers who each have personal, valuable insights to share on this question. We'll hear first from Bruce Lloyd, Emeritus Professor from London South Bank University, then from Peter Scott, the founder of the Centre for AI in Canadian Learning, and then from Alexandra Whittington, a futurist on the Future of Business team at TCS. And then we'll open up for a broader discussion. But let's hear first from Bruce Lloyd.
Thank you very much, David. I hope I'm not in a way here from under false pretenses, but my original work that I did putting this together, which some of you will have had as a slide presentation, was based on the theme Exploring AI, a Personal Journey. Now, AI, when it repackaged this, came up with the title, Learning with Machines. So that's what we're working on at the moment. But let me start with a bit of personal background. I officially retired about 20 years ago after a science technology-based education and a zigzag career in industry and finance, ending up in the academic world, concerned with strategy and future studies. Fortunately for me, I think, a couple of years ago, my old Sony computer packed it in, and I had to get a new one. And I got a new, very basic Dell system. not only was this much more efficient than my old machine, but it enabled me to do an awful lot of things that I would never have been able to do on my old machine. And we shouldn't forget that software is of no use if the hardware isn't working. And I'll emphasize that point. And I think David just had an example of, and I often have frustrations with the hardware. It just goes to show how important hardware is in the whole process. Now, I'm sure more of you, most of you, know a lot more about this area than I do. And I'm finding it impossible to keep up with things these days. But I hope that this exercise that has been repackaged by AI, called Around Learning from Machines, might be of interest, although it's just scratching the surface. I started exploring AI personally, and I believe it can be incredibly useful in helping discussions move forward. Few things frustrate me more than endless discussions that get nowhere and result in us going round in circles and reinventing the wheel. AI has an incredible capacity for structure, avoiding unnecessary padding, and it can also reduce partisan politics, personal and organizational games, as well as emotionally driven inputs, which usually discourages quality conversations. It's not ego or narcissistically driven. It avoids digressions rather than focusing on addressing the issue and actually answering the question, which I find it's surprisingly rare these days. It can cut through journalistic padding, academic obscurity, as well as encouraging new thinking about issues and emissions. So in theory, it should allow more time to be focused on new creative areas that make it easier for us to end up by making progress. Overall, it's allowed me to pander to my curiosity and capacity for asking questions, although it could be argued that it's also encouraged me to be even more superficial. Now, I also recognize that to some extent I'm a hypocrite. I enjoy new technology and I expect it to work. And I expect organizations to work efficiently. But at the same time, I recognize that the current system of hyper-competitiveness is problematic and probably just not sustainable. But it has encouraged me to pander to my undisciplined lack of focus, which has probably resulted in me not getting involved enough in effective action. And at this very late stage in life, I've enjoyed exploring it and the underlying challenges facing the future, where more fundamental changes are necessary. And I think I can benefit to some extent from being free from vested interest. Now, AI, as we all know, certainly has limitations and biases. It's not perfect and it makes mistakes. Its answers need checking, and getting another AI to check on the work of the others can be interesting and useful. But it's also often much better at recognizing, accepting, and correcting biases and mistakes than I find human beings are. One limitation for commercial organizations, which I won't go into, is the security of the data they're inputting. And I believe that there are now private AI systems that are now being developed. And there are plenty of other issues, copyright, hallucinations, ethics, which I'm not really getting involved in. And I'm very well aware that there are a lot of people who have very strongly anti-AI views. Increasingly, I believe the key unique human competence is not going to be around providing answers to questions that have already been answered, but in asking and exploring questions that have never been asked before. AI emphasizes the importance of asking clear, new questions. It can help us focus on more creative thinking, better questions, and lead us all, hopefully, to be better informed in our conversations. Of course, the first answers we get are only the start, and there's always scope for further questions. And increasingly, I'm finding that AI is pretty good at suggesting further questions that you might like to explore. As I say, it can be incredibly useful in helping us manage situations where we're drowning in data or struggling with information overload. It can help decision makers be better informed, which can help them make better decisions. And it's certainly going to replace many jobs. But just like all new technology in the past, it is likely, in my view, to end up creating many more jobs than it replaces. And of course, there's an issue of helping people move from one group to another, which generally speaking, we're very bad at. And for better or worse, it's likely to increase the gap between those who use it effectively and those who don't. And those sort of issues do need to be addressed. Now, on to a few areas that were explored on my LinkedIn site using a combination of several AI systems: ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Claude, Grok, Perplexity, DeepSeek, and usually a notebook discussion. More recently using their videos and their impressive slide presentations. But recently, I think I've run into a bit of a hardware problem on the LinkedIn site over the videos. Anyway, let me just very quickly run through some of the particular things that I've looked at. And the way AI has repackaged the comments. Is this working?
Yes.
Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can do. I think we'll have to leave it like that, Rob. I'm not an expert in this, and if I press the wrong button, everything disappears and we have to start again.
Try F11.
Okay. So it's a journey through discovering what AI, it says can and can't do. I would say what can help us and what it's good at and what it's not so good at. Now already I've clicked too far. One of the areas was to ask it, what are the business challenges in the year ahead? And then explored disagreeing with them. I haven't got time to go into why I disagreed with them, but it showed that AI can have different points of view, and it's very interesting to take issue with it. I looked at the historical boom in the context of the printing press, railways, speculative markets. It was able to examine 20 relevant books on technology disruption, and I asked it to examine its assumptions, whether they're valid, and it looked at analyzing the nature of speculative markets. At a political level, it was very interesting in the way it developed a UK housing strategy, a strategy for helping to sort out the homeless problem, to craft a tax policy combining growth and fairness, and its ability to combine the competing interests of various stakeholders. It was very interesting in exploring global crisis resolution, the Ukraine situation, trying to create a roadmap acceptable to all stakeholders. I really do hope that those people who are involved in these negotiations also try to see how AI can help them. And it also explored how consensus engineering can be applied more effectively. Looked at COVID lockdown lessons. What can we learn? They spent, or are spending, about £100 million on an inquiry. I think you could have probably got 80% of the answers in a day using AI. And perfect answers that the lawyers and the systems that we have at the moment seems to specialize on in are really not affordable, and we really have to focus on manageable areas where there is collective agreement and get on with them. I looked at exploring the rise and fall of civilizations. Lots of people have written about this, but I asked it to look at it from a management perspective, and it did that. It also was able to critique The Economist's 2026 views on the future. Interestingly enough, they nearly all did that without admitting that they couldn't actually access the original document. One of them was honest enough to admit that. But they did a pretty good job, and then I challenged them because I thought that they didn't take enough notice of demographic factors. On the cultural and creative areas, what Shakespearean play had the most relevant lessons for the future? Trying to compare the new Machiavelli with the Prince and the relevance today. Trying to interpret James Joyce's Ulysses, which gave me quite a good, better understanding of what it was all about. Quite staggering, all done within a minute. And of course, I wasn't in a position to check all these things, but they did. On first glance, they looked very credible. Another one in this area was I asked them to analyze I think it was about 100 programs of death in paradise and identify what the key success factors were, which it did very effectively. Another one was to explore, some of you might remember, but most of you aren't old enough, Bertrand Russell produced a very interesting book in the 60s called Has Man a Future? And I thought, well, let's see if AI could update it. It gave a very good outline, a draft outline, and I should think that you could end up by producing a draft outline of the book, certainly within a few hours. It's not the last word, but it was a very, very useful, interesting place to start. AI and the future of universities. I asked it to explore the impact of AI on higher education. What was the ideal way that AI should be used? And I find it's very useful to ask AI what it thinks about the way AI is going to affect whatever industry we're looking at. I was involved in a discussion about can AI be wise, and said, well, that's not really a very sensible question. It should be, how can AI help us be wiser? And of course, AI avoided, when I asked it, can AI be wise? It doesn't just say no, it just goes on and explains how it can be helpful to make us wiser. So good questions are terribly important, but actually, in many cases, AI answers a better question than the one you might have suggested in the first place. Now, there was a very interesting potential PhD to take 100 bathroom products. What were the raw materials in them? Where were they manufactured? And before they got into the bathroom. I didn't think it was going to cope with this. They all needed a bit of extra time to do it. And the interesting conclusion from a globalization point of view is virtually none of them raw materials and very little of the manufacturing was done in the UK. I don't know whether that's something that Trump, I doubt if it's an exercise that Trump does before he jumps around with his tariffs. A similar exercise, which I thought was quite a challenge, develop a new framework which would be a wise society index with 50 measurable indicators and evaluate 25 major countries. And it can be incredibly useful. I asked it to identify what the 100 most influential books ever written were and why. Some agreement, some disagreement. In the program that is on LinkedIn, there's an exercise about if you were Father Christmas, what would you give Donald Trump as a Christmas present? And why?
Well, we may have to stop you before you give away that secret, Bruce. And I'm afraid you're going to tell people who's going to win the World Cup and pr produce a spike of betting. So I just want to thank you for sharing that. I want to tell people, maybe if you, we can stop sharing this now. I'd like just to add one thing because Bruce has been saying he's been doing these exercises. I really encourage people to look at Bruce's LinkedIn because on his LinkedIn, you will find lots of videos. You will find lots of screen shares as well. Let me stop these share. I want to bring up just briefly so some of you can see one of the PDFs that was produced by Bruce. This is an amazing piece of work that summarizes a lot of the outcomes of many things he was working on. You can see here a bit about his history. You can see the slides that were produced. You can see the issues that were raised. And I'm not going to go through all of this now. It's a very useful set of slides that can highlight many of the issues. And that's just one of the sets of slides that Bruce has produced. And you can certainly learn a great deal by digging into these. Whether we should all be celebrating this or whether we should be holding our nose to an extent, well, we're going to find out that in the conversation that moves forward. So many thanks, Bruce. And I now want to hand the floor to Peter Scott, who has got many hats, but I'll leave him to introduce himself. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everyone who's on this side of the world, and good evening to the rest of you. And I have been pleased to be knowing David since I've started working in AI. Well, it was that was 2020. I'd been speaking on it since 2017. And for the last several years, I've been focused on education and starting business to help schools adapt to education, because no surprise of how that is affecting schools. If you look at headlines like this, they're all over the place with respect to dire messages. And I'm going to be talking about what the actual experience is that I've had in bringing AI education to schools has been. And I've been exposed to directly work in schools in mostly Canada, and then more or fewer in United States and United Kingdom, talking to a lot of people in that business. So I'm going to help you understand just where schools are at right now and what they need and what's working, what isn't. On the ground experience. And one of the things that I've found is that the traditional paradigm of the way that innovation in education happens has been turned upside down. And the point of innovation has been shifted to the classroom. It's no longer studies conducted in universities, departments of education, collated, meta-studies done, research produced, assimilated by ministries of education or departments of education, and filtered down through districts to schools. It's completely bottom up now. The classroom now is where change in education happens through the contact with AI. And in fact, that is going to happen more from the students than anything else. After all, most teachers found out about ChatGPT when their students started using it. So the students will be the main point of innovation because they're not hampered by decades of knowledge of what computers cannot do. And that's something that those of us, especially who have a formal background and education in computer science, have struggled with, right? What the teachers owe them as the guardrails to keep them safe. This is one of the things that is problematic right now. The teachers having trouble knowing how to do that. But then the teachers can provide the transformation of education in their schools. They just need the schools to provide policy that they can operate within. This is another one of those areas which is problematic to at the moment in its execution. And the point at which we can make the most difference to this, the closest that we can get to what's actually going on in the classroom, is through associations of schools. And hence I started this Center for AI in Education and Canadian Learning to work with schools directly through their leaderships. And then to have conversations with industry and governments and post-secondary institutions. So things we've discovered. The schools' responses to AI, post-secondary universities, the tutorial system, your Oxbridge and your Ivy League, are adapting well. They were closest to the ideal, Socratic ideal of school being a log with a teacher at one end and a student at the other. So when AI came along, that relationship was already strong enough that AI was seen as a tool to help with that. Others are, frankly, a mess. I have found this everywhere, mired in interdepartmental politics, conflicts, and paralysis, and are highly resistant to change and assistance from the outside. Which is why I've focused on secondary schools, because they are able to make decisions that change the way each institution adapts to AI, particularly the private ones, because they have that freedom, they're nimble, and they recognize that this is something they need to adapt to. The stories are just common everywhere. I have heard so many of the same stories now that they now have come to the point where they realize it's not going away. At least the first 18 months, the reaction of teachers and school leaders was, this is a fad, let's just wait until it blows over. Now they realize it's not going to blow over. And realizing that personal attention to students is the only solution for homework, because AI detection programs just don't work. Automated systems don't work. But getting to know your students' individual work is the only solution that teachers have reported being satisfied with for dealing with the academic integrity issue. But they nevertheless do not grasp the impact on the future of work or what needs to be taught. There is a huge variation both between and within schools. Some schools are further ahead, obviously, and similarly within schools, you will find a spectrum of teachers ranging from enthusiastic adopters to ones that are no AI ever, over my dead body. And whenever they mention a particular subject, it's invariably the English department for some reason. Teachers have not resolved their emotional responses to this. They still harbor a lot of wide range of deep feelings, mostly triggered by fear of losing their job, that have not been brought out into the open and discussed. This is one of the things that we do. School leaderships are not taking sufficient command of the situation because they're mostly waiting to find some direction from above. That's what they're used to getting. And I tell them it is not going to happen. You have to take a risk. They are concerned about, rightly, about impacts to cognitive autonomy. It's my term for the effectiveness of learning and what the neuroscience of individual learners. Is it improved or impaired by AI? And there are competing studies on that I will be talking about. And students' reactions range from cheating, using it because they can get away with it, to being afraid to use AI. I've got places where teachers say, our students have been given permission to use AI, but they're afraid to do it because they still think that they'll get into trouble. And I'll address how we deal with that, what we can do about that in a bit. So the reactions to this in the United States, for instance, this is just me walking through the exhibit hall at the Future of Education Technology Conference last month in Florida. Enormous, 4 million square feet conference center filled with this conference. The exhibit hall alone here took 5 minutes to walk from one end to the other, and half of it was about AI. Just enormous amount of energy now being devoted to this as people start realizing the amount of money that's available. Similarly, while it took a while to start, the number of schools in the US training teachers in AI has escalated dramatically. I wouldn't say that, I mean, this is a study out of RAND. I don't know what their standard was for training because I'd say that the evidence of that training is rather thin in many areas. I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but this is a framework for that are constructed for education and AI, reacting to it. And you see that we look at both how you teach and what you teach. Those are the things that are impacted by AI significantly. But in order to get to those, we have to align the staff at an institution behind a plan for reinventing what they do and how they do it. In fact, this how you teach and what you teach can be broken down along this axis, which I find useful, ranging from technology to humanity. So at one end, you focus on learning about AI, how to write it, develop it, what is it? And then you've got using AI, which is where we mostly focus in the schools. How can and should you use it? And then you've AI's effects upon us, the things that it's doing to the world. So even if you weren't going to use AI in education at all, you would still want to talk about and educate people on how it's changing the world that they're going to go out into, preparing them for that transformed workplace. And then finally, you've got what AI teaches us about ourselves because of the big questions that it brings up in around things ranging from the nature of consciousness and sentience to the other philosophical questions that have been going on for hundreds of years, but are now brought to a head by AI, and wondering whether it's got those qualities. We have focused our training, so that the place we land is training teachers and students around UNESCO's AI competency frameworks. And the things that what I want you to get out of these slides is looking at just, if you look at any of the intersections of these levels and aspects, and you look at their rubrics for the learning outcomes that they have, you realize just the scope of this. This is far, far beyond what you can get in the normal professional development cycle of a new idea in schools. It requires many hours of training to do any of these. This is what we've embarked upon. So let's talk about the homework. There are now a plethora of scales about how to use AI in homework. And the problem is that there's so many of them. You've got common is that there's no guidance whatsoever. Then there's, yes, you can use it, no, you can't. Then there's a traffic light, red, yellow, green, and you've got a rainbow, and then you've got a spectrum. This is Matt Miller's, and which is all of these levels ranging from no use of AI or even the internet whatsoever in completing an assignment, all the way up to AI wrote it and the student didn't even read it. The problem with a teacher giving the instruction, you can use AI on this assignment, is that the student is aware that while that technically includes the possibility of AI writing it and then sending it in without reading it, that's almost certainly not what the teacher intended. But now they don't know where else on this large spectrum the teacher actually really wants them to land, and quite probably neither does the teacher. So we have to look at this in different ways, and we've developed spectrums of responses here of different ways you can use AI. But the problem of boiling this down to something useful is still large. I'll talk about that in a moment. So but here's some really useful and important information. So at least 2 widely publicized studies showed negative impacts on learning from use of AI. One from MIT, one from Michael Gerlich. But Michael Gerlich, who was on my podcast, recently published a new study, showing that there's a positive impact on learning when you use AI in a particular structured prompting model way. And there's the detail of it, which is do it first without AI, and then use AI in particular ways as you go along. Now, there are still many more dimensions to how students should be working with AI in any given context. And we came up with one in the business, and it was literally 3-dimensional. And we looked at that and thought, that's accurate, but no one's going to work with that. We've got to simplify this somehow. Where we're looking at the moment is that AI is directions like this, and saying, well, use AI to help you with the learning, and it has you would have less usage there normally. But what you need to do in the service of that learning, then use AI more to help you do that. So in learning, that would be help you understand something. But if you need to, say, reformat something as a spreadsheet or something else that is not the point of the learning, but it's incidental and a requirement of the assignment, you use AI to actually do that and make it happen faster. We help teachers understand there are so many lenses that you need to look at AI through just for the purposes of your training, of your teaching, about how it's affecting the world. You see the list here. The fact that I don't have time to even talk about any of these gives you an idea of the scale of how this is something that requires much more than the usual amount of training teachers in something new. But to sum up here, the big problems that people are focusing on right now are going to be small when they look at them through future lenses. A couple of years from now, we'll be going, oh, we were so worked up about that homework cheating thing. That turned out to be a relatively minor thing that we were able to solve, and then move on to the real issues. I'll be happy to talk a lot more about this when we get to the Q&A. And there's a snapshot for the work we're doing. thank you very much for the time, and I'm going to turn this back over to our host. You're muted.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Peter. So caicl.org for more information. And indeed, we'll surely come back to many of the topics you've raised, as indeed we'll come back to topics that were raised at the beginning by Bruce. But let's hear now from Alexandra Whittington. And she has, I'm sure, a different perspective to add into the mix. Are you going to give a thumbs up to this possibilities? Are you scared of cheating? Are you scared of inefficient teaching methods? Or do you think we should be focusing, as Peter suggested, on broader questions such as the future of work?
I am all of the above to give the best test answer out there, all of the above for me. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I wanted to start, David, you reminded me of a video I used to love to show when I was teaching a class called The Impact of Technology on Society. It was a clip from the show Downton Abbey. Do you watch Downton Abbey, London Futurists, or did you? I imagine hopefully it's as popular as, no, not as, okay. Well, I'd highly recommend it because it's a dramatization of a really revolutionary time in technology, right? During the show, they get the telephone, they get electricity, they get the record player. I think it's the Victrola, they get all these new technologies. So it's really cool to watch how they write the story around that. And that video clip that I used to share was when the video of when they got their, the scene when they got their telephone. The first telephone in the whole town, I guess, or the whole area was installed there in their mansion, right? The Downton Abbey mansion. And the butler is practicing how to answer the calls. Like he's in his room by himself, practicing with the telephone, like, because back then what did you say when you answered the phone, right? It was a new technology and we were learning the social behaviors, creating the norms and all of that around this new technology. And I think AI is, a lot like that. We're trying to figure out, how do we act? How do we behave? Is cheating the issue? Is it okay to use AI? Is it, as I noticed in the comments, intellectually dishonest, right? To use what you're getting out of a Gen AI and present it as your own, for example. How do we approach the whole thing with the sources, the references, and making up references? All of those issues tie really well into that story of how do we respond? How do we socially behave? What's the right and wrong here? And we're living in a time when we're creating that reality. We're writing those rules. So something that where I had meant to start before you reminded me of that scene from Downton Abbey is a speech that was made by someone who's rather involved in the futurist movement over the past couple of decades, a famous anthropologist named Margaret Mead. And she gave a speech that related to the future of education in 1966, where she advocated for something that she called dropout university. And it was the idea that we should let go of this concept of 4 years of college and so many years of primary school or whatever, but that people should be able to drop in and out of learning as it suits them, right? They should be able to learn and then leave when they feel they've learned enough and come back later to learn more as it works, in their lifetime. And I think that that's a terrific historic artifact, right? That actually meshes with the rise of AI. Because by the time Margaret Mead said that in 1966, AI was a thing. It was experiencing maybe the first resurgence after one of those AI winters that went on. But AI was around in 1966. And I don't think she made that connection. But I think that AI is going to show a continuity, a historical continuity, dating back to 100 years ago, even when public school, when compulsory education really became a thing. And my experience draws a lot on the United States and the American experience. But, this idea that schooling starts at 0 and ends at 18 and might extend a few years into adulthood, and then you're kind of done learning everything you need to learn. I think AI is going to help us discard that outdated idea, that outdated notion. And it really meshes with something else, something another futurist said, which is the famous quote about unlearning, that Alvin Toffler is known for. So just throwing out a couple of inspirational pieces to set off my comments, because I have heard here Bruce Lloyd touch on something that I find very interesting that I've looked at lately. And in the interest of time, I'm going to keep my comments pretty short. But Bruce mentioned this concept of wisdom, finding the wisdom, right? Wise answers. Does AI open up more wisdom to us? And I think that with AI, a lot of people have noticed that we may be able to kick off a new scientific revolution, right? We have all these new AI tools, things, like I said, that have been in development for decades, are now coming to fruition. So there are new ways of exploring nature. And that's exactly what science is, right? The study of nature. New ways that AI allows us to study nature is going to open up some of those windows of wisdom. And in addition to that, AI has proven really good at learning or helping us learn and understand ancient, indigenous, and traditional societies. In fact, I was just reading, I thought that was fascinating how the nation of India has now established the first sort of AI encoded, I'm not sure, AI built database on traditional knowledge, especially traditional medicine. And they've actually come up with a new concept during this project that's called, I'll have to look it up, but it's a combination of Ayurvedic and like biotech, right? They've come up with a term. I'm going to have to check my social media and I'll put it in the chat. But it was in the article, and it's actually in a UN study. World Health Organization has done a report on this repository of information that's starting to merge modern technology and research methods like AI with traditional healing, cultural, and spiritual practices like Ayurveda. So that's the kind of thing that gets me really excited. And when Bruce Lloyd was asking, is there wisdom to be tapped into through AI? I think that's a perfect example. That's a perfect example because human traditions and our ancient knowledge is an untapped resource. And part of the reason for that, maybe we didn't have this kind of like massive data crunching tool like AI to be able to figure out what did they know? How did societies live so long on this planet without disrupting its balance? Something that we don't seem capable of doing. The other thing Bruce Lloyd mentioned that I found so interesting was hyper competitiveness is not sustainable. And in a big way, neither is AI, at least as now as we know it. We know that it's putting a lot of pressure on natural resources. So I think squaring away resources, nature, sustainability, there's a huge role for AI to play there. And that will have a lot of learning involved as well. So lastly, I want to pick up on something that I noticed in the Q&A or the comments here, which was experiments, talking about, how education tends to be based on not very strong theories, let's say. I'm sorry if I can't find the comment, but I just read this somewhere here about, the way that we teach reading, for example, is not really based on a scientifically valid theory of how reading is learned. We really don't know. How does a person learn to read? How does a person learn to speak? All of these things that we're still trying to figure out, they call it the science of learning. And so my last point here is I'm very hopeful that the right thinkers can get their hands on AI, educational researchers, neuroscientists. It's going to be a mix of people from different fields of study to help us really understand how does the human mind learn? How does memory really work? All of these things, there's still a lot to learn about it. So I'll close my comments there, and I thank you for sharing the time.
Many thanks. Well, we have got lots of issues that we can collectively cover. Thanks to all three of you for setting out a range of key issues. I'm going to go around you again, asking maybe for a couple of minutes from each of your time, and you can pick up any point that's particularly on your mind. I will raise three that you might like to consider. There was this question of which methods have got good data to back them up, and Peter's already suggested that writers, researchers such as Gerlich, can identify some evidence that particular methods in AI can help. But at the same time, there's a question from Mary Hunt that says maybe we are underestimating the psychological drawbacks of using AI. AI might actually help people to get the right answers, but it might leave them to be unskilled or to lose our critical thinking capabilities. Is there evidence of that? Is that something you're afraid of? And the third question, perhaps, which I'm just picking out, but you can feel free to address others, is I think, Peter, again, you suggested to school leaders that they have to be brave and bold. Don't wait for the Ministry of Education to give them answers. But aren't they right to be afraid? Because if they make an experiment and their students mess up and they can't get jobs, they get poor grades, they're going to be horribly criticized, aren't they? So what can you say to such school leaders to give them more courage to be brave? So, as I said, let's go to Peter first. Sorry, to Bruce first. If you unmute, and then you can. Bruce, you have to unmute.
We're not quite into telepathy yet, but amazing what you're doing, Peter. And just a couple of points. One was raised in the chat about the betting industry, and I'll just make the point that I ended on, and that is there are many industries which are almost entirely dependent upon the competitive use of good information. And that is all that they have, including the gambling and betting industry is one of them. Other industries, they are going to be so radically changed by people using AI. It's very difficult to know where it's going to end. And if I can just, in passing, mention that another of the exercises I did was, can the human race work out how to eliminate the need for war and conflict? It does also, I think it's quite good at writing poetry, surprisingly enough. But it's also interesting to see that at the end of the exercise it did on the learning with machines, its one sentence conclusion was, the machine can calculate, but only a human can care. Our task is to bring both together responsibly, reflectively, and wisely. This was the conclusion that AI came up with. It wasn't a conclusion that I put into the system, but it must have picked it up implicitly. And I haven't got time at the moment to go through a few key points that I would suggest for organizations to think very carefully on. And the first one is, why do we want to know? There is so much data and information around that people are going to have to be much more focused on why they want to know in order to turn all what we've been talking about into effective action. But there are lots of other things, suggestions as well, which maybe we'll come back to.
Thanks. Peter, your chance to add some more to the conversation.
Well, thank you. And Mary's question is really central to the issue right now. And what we know at this point is if you use AI to avoid learning, it is very good at that. If you use it to enhance your learning, it is very good at that too. The issue now revolves around how to get one, not the other. And that boils down to the motivation. And it now puts the teachers in the role of delivering to the students the why. Books and the internet deliver to the students the how, the what. AI delivers them the how, but the teachers now, it's their job to give the students the why, the motivation. And I tell them, no student is going to remember something that ChatGPT told them for the rest of their life, but you can do that, and that is your job. On the teaching side, we can use AI to do things that were impossible due to time constraints at least. Otherwise, you can, for instance, construct a table of the differences between students in your class, their grade level, first language, um, uh, neurodivergent status, and many other aspects. And then you can feed that into AI to construct differentiated learning by saying, here's this week's assignment, whatever it is, whatever the topic, customize it for each individual student. And now it speaks directly to them. If they want it in Star Wars metaphors, then it will do that. This is something that takes far too long for teachers. Similarly, in helping with the assessment. And on the learning side, it becomes a tutor. So it effectively gives every student access to an expert tutor in every subject around the clock for nothing. What could be more democratizing? But you can lead the horse to water. Only they can choose to drink. And our job is to motivate them to drink. And one of the things that I'll just conclude by saying is that we've got to give them a much clearer, even if we can't be clear, we have to give them a much more desirable and compelling picture of their future at the moment than the one that the headlines are delivering about how the future of their work is so dystopian. We've got to give them a future, a vision of the future that they can latch onto and pull themselves toward. Thank you.
Absolutely. Alexandra.
Well, to respond to Mary's question, I would point out this kind of new theory that's out there. It's called the theory of the extended mind. And the idea here comes from philosophy, and it comes to the idea that, for example, a technology can be where we sort of offload our mental, burdens, let's say, whether it's remembering something or, holding it there for later reference. And I love the example some of these scholars talk about, which is the spider web. When the spider weaves his web, he's actually encoding it with some information. It works as an extended mind of the spider. It helps them remember where the food is or something or other. I'm not sure what it tells them. But if we can use AI in that sort of fashion, like a spider weaving a web, leaving ourselves a note for later, if it can be something that is very ingrained in our lives and also leaves no trace, like a spider's web, I would say that would be a really cool, exactly, Peter Scott, yes. That would be a really cool use of AI. And so I think that let's not limit our concerns or our, possibilities to the risks, and try to look at, the bright side. And that's always going to be my tendency as a futurist. But I do think, there may be some advantages to AI. We just have to handle it correctly. But I would say, really in brief, that we need to also reconsider what is learning. As I mentioned, the science of learning is still to be understood. And something that was recently in Wired that I thought was quite interesting is that AI developed a pharmaceutical to provide a psychedelic experience without the LSD or whatever, right? Like it's a pill, but you don't have like the negative side effects of the psychedelic trip, right? So to me, that's another kind of unexpected way AI could change this idea of, cognition, learning, mental function. If you just take a pill and it changes your mental state. So may or may not be a hallucinogenic experience, but if we can orient thinking, the brain through experiences that are particularly striking by being these highly, neurological neuroplasticity experiences through drugs that AI formulates, I think that's a future that few people are seeing coming. But that's another way that AI might come in and change the way we learn, think, and the mind works.
Wow, nootropics designed by AI that will make us better able to do the good aspects of learning, the good aspects of judgment, the good aspects of creativity. Well, that certainly deserves more discussion. Nootropics have been around for a long time. They're in the same state as edutech. People were expecting them and they haven't really happened, and people were expecting them and they still didn't really happen. So that is one thing I'm going to encourage panelists to be free to address on the next round. Other things I'm going to pick at what I see. There's a question by Peter Morgan on, well, what is the likelihood that universities are going to play a big role in the future? Are universities going to become less significant? And same with other institutions. And that has many angles to it. Stephanie Carroll raises a point building on that, that if we end up with a decentralization of learning where the role of universities is less, and we are more influenced by key influencers or by what she calls quasi-educators, that could be good, but it could also be bad if there is a loss of public authority. And Anna also comments on this. Her own experience of AI is that sometimes she thinks given her misleading information, not just that it's hallucinated, but possibly it's issuing a worldview that she feels deeply uncomfortable with. So is that what's going to happen if universities lose their current role? So that's a second question, along with the nootropics question. And the third one I gave you to choose from, well, maybe we'll come back to that later. Maybe that's enough for the start off with, and you can pick out any other points from the conversation too. Bruce.
Right. Well, addressing Margaret's question that she put in about the big question and the university question as well, I mentioned in brief, it's always worth exploring what AI thinks about this issue to start with. And it's actually, I think, surprisingly sensible. I'm not, my experience is that it might have biases, but I haven't found it, one or two occasions it's hallucinated, but I don't think there's a conspiracy of it lying.
But are you thinking it's sensible because it has picked up what's on your mind and it's feeding that back to you in a way that's nicely presented so that makes you more keen to think, hey, this is clever? Are you sure that it truly is unbiased?
Of course, I'm not sure, but I think it's a lot better than a lot of the newspapers that I read or don't read anymore because they're so biased.
Right. Who else would like to pick up the conversation?
I just wanted to share, if you haven't seen it, it's worth looking at this study that came out of Harvard a couple of months ago. I think it's called Which Humans? And they looked at like cultural mental models and compared it to like the most popular LLMs. And it was interesting. You know, they talked about basically the cultural bias of Chat GPT and all of the common ones. And so how it sort of mirrors the say cultural constructs of I can't remember now, but like a white European male, basically, and how other cultural experiences are just completely, you know, disparate from what the norm of these LLMs are. So it's an interesting study to look at when you're thinking about how to use these to help people learn.
Can I just say something quickly on that? I think I've come across that first time round, but if you challenge it on these issues, it takes you a long way towards dealing with the issues that you've just raised, Alexandra. It's not perfect, but it's well aware of how to reinterpret the information that it's got in another context. And if I can just quickly add something about universities. I mean, universities do three things. They do research, AI is going to change that. They do teaching, which is going to change that because it's going to change that because the transfer of information that was very inefficient anyway and very much dependent upon the enthusiasm of the teacher rather than the 45 slides that you go through on a PowerPoint presentation. It's going to change that. But the whole question of the role of universities for personal development is completely underassessed and irrelevant in the league tables. And I think the universities could work out how they could make the personal development dimension so much more important. And of course, that overlaps with the humanities as well.
And if universities were to reprioritize personal development as opposed to these other two things, which now they have less need for, how would they look differently from today?
Well, I'm not an expert, but I'm copping out by saying, well, one of the first things I would do is to ask AI how it would handle that. And I think it would be a very useful place for lots of people to start.
Good answer. Peter, what would you like to say?
I want to just shift gears to a more bite-sized question, Margaret's question about the AI tutors. Because, well, think about what are the big players in AI, the large language models? Everyone knows ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, and so forth. Well, in the education world, there's a similar kind of triumvirate, more so. You've got Brisk, Toddle, Magic School, School.ai, Flint. These are the big players that are now producing massive AI systems that are designed to be integrated into a school's a school's IT infrastructure for use by staff and students to be essentially the mechanism through which assignments are issued, completed, and graded, with AI being occupying a tutor function as part of that. And there's immense competition. And the questions I get asked all the time are, which one of these should we use? Because schools, so many people want to reduce hard questions like the ones we're talking about to transactional things like that because that's what they're used to. And I tell them, well, this is rather like asking, should I get a Ford or Toyota when you've never seen a car before and you don't know how to drive? We have to start before that, otherwise you're going to be taken to the cleaners by the first used car salesman that meets you. And so those systems are, to make a long answer short, very good by and large when you use them for that purpose because they've been optimized to do things like not give students an answer, not cheat for them, but to prod them through Socratic inquiry to learn more. Of course, nothing stops student from using some other system somewhere else to bypass that, and so it's an incomplete answer at best. It also raises questions about privacy of conversation. Longer topic that I should get into another time.
Thanks. Anything more to add just now, Alexandra?
Just thought I should point out, in the bigger picture, as a futurist, we're always looking for like these converging forces. And so the rise of things like AI tutors really melds and meshes well with the demographic shifts that we know are coming, right? We already have a teacher shortage. We already have schools in America that are closing down because there aren't enough children. We already have a fluctuating tax base here in our society. The public school funds are based on the local property taxes. So things that are changing in other parts of society are having a role to play in this too, as to whether AI tutors are going to teach our kids or not, right? Somewhere in between.
Great. Let me come back to some of the big question of the future of work. What will humans be doing in the near future? And I've had various suggestions in our conversation so far that there are things that AIs aren't very good at, and we're still going to need humans to do that. So Bruce suggested that humans are necessary to ask good questions. On the other hand, Bruce also pointed out that sometimes the AI itself says, here's an answer, and by the way, here are the questions I think you should be asking next. So we already might be seeing AIs raising a bunch of questions. And if you ask an AI, what question should it be asking now? It may come up with some interesting things. So I'm not personally completely convinced by that. Another suggestion is that humans care more than AIs. Well, people often feel that the AIs do seem to care about them. They get a warmer feeling, maybe misleading, almost certainly misleading, but they feel more reassured, they feel more supported sometimes from an interaction with an AI than they do with a human who they imagine is judging them and laughing at them for their failure. So there's already a feeling that maybe AIs can do some of the caring stuff as well. And then there's a technical point made by Alexander Sorokin in the Q&A. It's too long to read out, but basically he argues, he points to a paper from a Google DeepMind researcher that there's something called abductive reasoning, which AIs can't do, which is jumping to the best explanation for a puzzle. I've never been convinced by that in the remote slightest. I find it's a very weak argument. I find that abductive reasoning is a combination of throwing out lots of interesting hypotheses and then figuring out whether these hypotheses might explain the situation under that needs explanation. So I'm not convinced yet by any of these offerings as to what any of these answers as to what humans will need to do in the future that AIs can't do. So I wonder if you agree with that or if you think there's other things that should be emphasized as the unique role for humans. Any of you can jump in on that.
Well, let me jump in on that again. I mean, we've had a couple of revolutions in the past. One, the move from agriculture into manufacturing, and the other one, the move from manufacturing to service industries. And if you look over time, these changes have been staggering, and we've generated an enormous number of new jobs. Now, the new jobs are going into services, not all knowledge services. They go into the creative industries, which tends to not even get very much mention in future of work books, staggeringly. And actually, David, you mentioned books going back some time. I remember books in the 1980s about teleworking and the future of work then. Now, the problem, the fundamental problem, and I did some work a long time ago on the fact that the coal industry was going to not exist 25 years ahead. The problem then was that we didn't put money into helping people make the transfer. And it's very interesting in Denmark. I think anybody that's been made unemployed because of AI gets a lot of government support in trying to get new jobs. And the issue isn't about whether it's going to create jobs or destroy jobs. It's how can you help people move from one area to another.
Anybody else got views on that? Are you confident there's going to be plenty types of new jobs in the future, as has been in the case after the previous disruptions of industrial revolutions?
I'm going to take this to a meta level here because you talked about some very big issues, questions and answers. And I'm going to bring in the North Star, the guiding principle that we use in our work in schools. And that came originally from my work on the future of work, which is everything that we do is grounded on one question, which is who do you want to be in a world where machines can think? And we put that out to teachers, students alike, as not an assignment, not give me 500 words by Monday, not something that demands just you come up with an answer and then you're done, but as a life-generating principle. And it's proven to be extraordinarily useful as a North Star in navigating these big questions of what's the future going to be, because we can't predict. And we know that we can't predict enough. And if our decisions, our life depends upon prediction, we're lost. This principle reminds us to decide who we want to be, first of all, and then navigate towards, push towards that, as opposed to being dependent upon and therefore a victim of what the machines are going to do, what the big corporations are going to do, and then people are paralyzed. This question, I find, gives them enormous agency, and whenever I get lost in what to do, how to answer something, where to go next with a group, I find that leads me in the right direction.
Having that North Star as to where we want to be in a world in which AIs can do all the thinking. Alexandra, what's your thought on this?
Well, if I could just sort of tie the comments together a little. I too, Bruce, have looked back at business books from the 1980s. And one of the things that I noticed they predict is that we're going to overpopulate the earth and we're going to run out of resources and we're going to have too many people and we don't know what to do. And as we all know, that's not what happened. In fact, the reverse has happened, and we're now in a birth rate decline that no one saw coming. No one knows what to do about, and there's nothing we can do right now. Whatever need to be done need to happen 20 years ago. So I think those sorts of realities can help drive home the fact that, to use another example from Downton Abbey, in that show, one of the funny scenes is when a young man who works as a lawyer tells the older woman who's been around since 1800s that he's going to do something on the weekend. And she said, "What's a weekend?" Because the concept of a weekday and a weekend day, those are byproducts of the Industrial Revolution, right? The idea that Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, all of that stuff was formulated in the early 1900s and the Industrial Revolution early phases. So to me, we're in the very same boat, right? These new concepts, there may be a day where there's some sort of new form of learning, new space of learning, new experience of learning that we can't even conceive right now. The term lifelong learning wouldn't even cut it, right? So I just thought I would point out those two realities and those connections between the comments here, and how we really, again, to echo Peter, we cannot predict. We're going to get it wrong, but that does not mean we should not think about it. We should think about it. We should be ready for whatever happens.
There's some questions about what might go wrong. And so I'll feed this in and then I'll go around you again, and you can either answer these or you can continue the previous lines of conversation. One thing that might go wrong, PNJ suggests, is that people will just form the wrong ideas of AI. Too many people anthropomorphize the AIs and think of them in unhelpful ways. And so long as that's the case, then they're unlikely to get the best out of AIs. So do we need to educate people more about the actual capabilities, the actual nature of AIs, and resist our psychologically well-grounded instinct to anthropomorphize something that seems to be alive in such a way? So that's one thing. There's another way in which something could go wrong differently. Alexander Sorokin raises the question of the environmental impact of AIs. He's pointing out to the alleged millions of gallons of fresh water used a day, or the electrical needs. Will society say, hang on, this is not sustainable? Maybe the power grid won't sustain it, and they'll say, right, I know this is very seductive and very convenient, but we're not going to do it anymore. Maybe there's other risks that might cause societal backlash against the use of AIs. So are there risks ahead? And if so, what would you suggest we do about them? Bruce?
If I can start off with that, one of the points I would have added at the end is what point I made at the beginning, and you've made too, is that all this is only as good as the hardware that's working. And there are major issues that we're getting very dependent on it working. And I'm not quite sure what happens if for one reason or another it stopped working. But to relate to Peter's point, there was another book that came out 50 years ago, which I think was a very profound book. Unfortunately, the author, Fred Hirsch, died very young, but it was called The Social Limits to Growth. And it doesn't get the attention it deserves because it really forces us to think, what do we really mean by success? And that dimension has got to be addressed, increasingly addressed. And I think the more you get into the creative industries, the more ambiguous it becomes, because there's an awful lot of AI that is not monetarily driven. There's a lot that is, and if you're just going to drive the system by maximizing profits, it's just going to increase the chances of it not being sustainable.
Thanks. Anybody else? Peter?
The point about the water usage comes up a lot, and it's a narrative that seems to have gotten out of control. I'm going to sound partisan here because I don't know how to sound. I don't know how the objective take about this doesn't sound that way, but I'm not pushing a false narrative here. According to the figures that I've got, if data center usage in the United States escalated at its current rate, by 2030, it would consume 150 million gallons of water per day. There's your millions of gallons, which would be 0.12% of US freshwater consumption. If you were a minuscule fraction of what golf courses use. So if you're concerned about data center water usage, you should be equally concerned about water-based theme parks, for instance. So there's this is something where we need a lot more light and objectivity, because there's a narrative there that's gotten out of control based upon absolute numbers, like people saying, "Wow, it uses a bottle of water to answer one Chat GPT question. That's a lot. Think of all the billions of Chat GPT questions." But the same amount of water is used by watching 8 seconds of Netflix. So put that in perspective, and then compared to industries like aluminum smelting, thermoelectric power, mining, and forestry, again, it's practically in the noise. So we really need objective information on this to get out more.
I will back that up. Andy Masley, whose name I put in the chat, has written very clearly on this issue. So on current projections, it isn't, the water usage itself isn't such a big issue as has been made out. I'm not complacent, because I will project forward much more usage of AI perhaps than people had expected. And I also think it may be more of an issue in some parts of the world. For example, India has very significant water shortages already. And if there are lots more AI data centers, that small increment of water usage there could make things significantly worse. So we do absolutely need to think of the energy uses, the environmental impact of AI. It's more complicated, of course, because AI can also help to work out smarter ways to irrigate. A lot of the water shortages in India are due to inefficient use in irrigation. Too much water is given out when it's not always needed. And if AI is monitoring, there can be maybe at least a 5% benefit. And because the amount of water used in agriculture is much, much larger than the water used in AI, that can cover these costs. So people like Andrew Masley are worthwhile looking at there. But then again, the future could see lots of other issues. And again, Alexander Sorokin is raising the point that there's an issue in Texas. I think, again, Andy Masley has answered that, and I might find the link and put it in the chat afterwards. Alexander, you're in Texas, aren't you? Are you up to date on that issue? Or maybe that's something that's come your way.
It's not affecting where I live, but I understand, kind of the Austin area where there's a lot of tech activity going on. I just would say, yeah, in general, don't underestimate the backlash, especially when you're talking about educating young people against AI, because I do see a lot of it on social media. I mean, I happen to have teenagers, and I hear some interesting things um, in the house, but when I ask about how's it being used in school and what do you think, there's some interesting opinions out there. So I would not, sleep on Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and definitely Gen Beta, the next upcoming generations. You know, having some pretty strong feelings about the sustainability aspect. There was a recent article in a study based on a study that we've hit kind of peak water bankruptcy across the earth. Various countries are reaching the point of no return when it comes to water. So I think as these tensions play out, don't underestimate young people on their environmental activism.
You're right. This is what I find in the schools is that the one issue where the students are uh, most activated is around this environmental thing, but they're operating off false information.
I was on a call earlier this week in a group called Pull the Plug. It's a group that wants to ensure that the uses of AI are decided by democracy rather than by whatever's convenient for, as they call it, billionaires in Silicon Valley. And the breakout group that I was assigned to there was completely dominated by this environmental issue. So the techlash is upon us, and people may be irrational, or they may have good reasons that they're picking these things and exaggerating them in their minds. So we absolutely need to offer a positive vision in which AI will be for good, which means we must show how we are going to constrain some of the worst tendencies of some of these billionaires. Bruce, you had another point to make.
Well, a couple of points. First of all, very quickly, I think the Chinese are working very hard in lots of other areas on using technology to reduce the energy demand, the water demand, and there's a lot of potential innovation around that. And the other thing is, I did this exercise about AI's view on Luddites, and we explored the fact that the problem wasn't the technology. So basically, the problem was people felt they didn't have control over what was happening, and they felt they were being exploited. Now, that is the dimension that we've got to be very careful about, because it gets caught up with the technology.
I think we should take the final round of comments, and feel free to emphasize anything you believe should be uppermost in people's minds as they leave. The question that I would also suggest you consider is, well, what is success? What will it really mean? This has come up a couple of times. What is our true north? Where do we want to get to? Rather than just making more profit or even seeing more information transferred, rather than just finding better ways to test students so that we know that they have actually absorbed the knowledge rather than just passed it on from the AI to the exercise book. So what would you offer as the big picture, or what else would you like to emphasize as your final comments? Bruce?
Again, going back to one of the questions about biases, I've explored AI using DeepSeek and Quorn, and it's those Chinese are at the frontier of where you would expect biases, and very occasionally you get it. But it's very interesting to get it to cross-check the work of other AIs, and you can reduce the amount of bias in the system by doing that. And in the end, I think that what we've got to do is to focus on encouraging curiosity, encouraging more rigorous definition of what are the really important questions that we should be getting AI to focus on, and how can we get AI to help that process.
I back you up in pointing out that AIs are often less biased than many humans. I see on X, formerly Twitter, Many times people are quite biased in their comments and they ask Grok, which is the AI built into Twitter, what do you think about this Grok? And quite often Grok is, it seems to me, much more balanced and sensible than the people who were hoping it would spout some
Yeah.
MAGA nonsense. It's maybe been trained by MAGA enthusiasts, but somehow it still is offering in my view, a much less biased answer. So we should not push away all AI saying humans are always better. On the contrary, AIs can be very valuable on that. Final comments, Peter?
Uh, yes, Grok does that often to Elon Musk's chagrin. A point Elon Musk is predicting something that I think is a little more trustworthy, that AI data centers are going to move into space. And if he can do for that what he's done with Starlink, I think that that's quite likely and may resolve the question of data center power usage and environmental impact quite rapidly. I'm just going to, for final comment, I'm going to show something that I've used with a number of groups here to illustrate the way that AI in education spans this huge range of domains of impact, ranging from the things that are obvious to us, the transactional layer, which is where most people want to take this, to which tools should I use, all the way down through ones that are less visible, the mental, the psychological questions of teachers not even thinking about how are students facing AI, what is their emotional reaction to a world that's telling them as loudly and clearly as it can that there won't be a job for them. This has not been adequately explored in schools because teachers are focused on their jobs and how things are changing, all the way down to the unconscious layer. So this is the image I want to take away, that this is something that has so many dimensions of the way it affects our lives. And in education, those all come into play. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are indeed many dimensions which we're not going to have time to explore in the remaining 2 minutes or so. So if people are still in the audience after we switch off the recording in a few minutes, there will be a chance to explore at least some of them informally in a session where I'll let people, if they wish, turn on their mics and their cameras, and some of the speakers may stay for that, though some of them have also got other pressing issues to attend to. Alexandra, I'll give you the last words.
Thank you so much. And I think, all of these comments, these final thoughts are really helpful to figure out what do we do next, right? Because this moment does call for action. And those of us who are here to think about this and talk about this on a weekend, people are looking to us to see how do we respond. So I would just say, as much as possible, let's use AI to enhance the human experience, right? And that means stripping away those biases when we can recognize them. Get the gender inequality out of AI, because we know this is a problem. Women can be victimized by AI, as we saw, speaking of X, right? A recent rash where people were, I'll just say, dehumanizing women in their images with commands to Grok, right? So on the other hand, we can use AI to uplift women, right? To have new career opportunities, to have, new educational opportunities and experiences. So I think that let's work really hard to strip away the bad parts of our society that have already been imprinted on and trained, you might say, into AI, and focus on, keeping it positive and something that can help us. I've often said, if there was a way to have an algorithm like the social media algorithms that apparently can convince people to do harmful things to themselves or to others, can we somehow flip that around and make an AI algorithm that makes people feel good about themselves, to want to love and care for each other, to protect one another and not compete? Instead, let's all work together. So that's my dream. Let's invent that AI that has the opposite effect of the negative algorithms on social media.
Lots of positive visions there. If we can get this right, the future could be remarkably good. I will finish with that comment. I want to thank Bruce Lloyd, Peter Scott, and Alexander Whittington for giving a lot of their time on this Saturday. and look forward to continuing the discussion in many forums. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.